You to share if you wouldn't mind. Oh, gosh, we have a nice group with us tonight. This is great. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Hi, everybody. My name is Kim Porter. I'm the Executive Director of Be a Part of the Conversation. I am so excited about this program this evening. I can't even tell you, and I'm really excited that you're all here with us. I think that you're going to be in very good hands tonight. Our organization is called Be a Part of the Conversation. We've been around for 10 years. We serve a 5-county area surrounding Philadelphia. I want to thank our community partner, Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services, is supporting this program. So thank you to Netta Soltani and her team for helping us put this together. I want to introduce you to our program director, Judy Hirsch.
Hi, everyone.
And our communications manager, Kara Schwartz. She's there somewhere. It always takes Kara a minute to get her audio going. Say it again, Kara.
Hi, everyone.
There we go.
My mute button always gives me issues.
I know. We're getting there. I want to let you know that you can ask us questions at any time during the program by using the chat box or the Q&A box. So you can make it, if you use the Q&A, you can make it an anonymous question. If you use the chat, only the panelists will see your name. So in any event, please feel free to submit those throughout the program. And thank you to those of you who submitted questions in advance. We have a lot of questions and we have more than 100 folks with us this evening. So we're going to do our very best to get to everyone. I also want to let you know that we are recording this program. So a big thank you to our panelists for allowing that. I'm glad that you all are with us live though, because this is going to be very interactive, I hope, and a good panel discussion. But you might want to share the information with friends and loved ones and so on. So that recording will be available. At the end of this program, there will be an opportunity to take a survey. It will pop up on your screen, and we ask you to do that. It just takes a moment, but it really helps us to know what was helpful, what you'd like to hear in the future, and so on. Just quickly tell you a couple of things that we have coming up. We're so excited about this new series that we're beginning called Creative Recovery. We're going to be taking a look at different types of ways that we can enhance or support or deepen recovery for people who have a substance use disorder, and also for family members like myself and some of the folks you'll meet tonight. We're going to have panelists on June 28th covering some of these topics. We'll have another follow-up because we won't get to everything that night. And then after that, we're going to start scheduling some workshops and fun activities to feature each of these kinds of things. So using art or music or being outdoors, adventure, being with animals, whatever it is that enhances recovery, we want to talk about and share it with others, because recovery is not the end of fun, it is just the beginning. Please check our calendar, conversation.zone/calendar. Judy is going to be sharing things in the chat. So if you're able to get to the chat, you'll find links to some things throughout the program. Also want to point out that there are parent partnership meetings taking place online right now, and there are other support group meetings that are under different umbrellas that you can also find on this page on our website. There are a number of them. We have almost every night of the week covered with some kind of support for parents, grandparents, other family members who are concerned about someone with a substance use disorder. And along those lines, I also would like to point out that Standing in the Storm is an amazing collection of stories and information, research that Pam and Bill Roberts, who are with us tonight, really did a beautiful job of compiling many years ago. And they interviewed dozens and dozens of parents, and that's available on our site at, our site at no charge. It's a downloadable, it's 3 different PDFs that you can download. I'm going to be telling you more about them in just a second. But also, one of these parent partnership meetings is coming Wednesday. I just wanted to make note of, because we are going to have Mike Blanche with us, who is he is our clinical advisor, and he's a really terrific clinician in the region. He's going to be talking with our parent support group about codependency. And that link, convo.zone/partnership, is not a registration. You don't have to register. But if you click on that, it'll take you right to the Zoom meeting at 7 p.m. next Wednesday, the 9th. And Judy will share that as well. I'll also put that up on our follow-up page. Oh, I forgot to mention the follow-up page. We have a follow-up page for this. Conversation.zone/Montco, which Judy also shared with you. That's where you're going to find a lot of really helpful information. So we really want you to have that. But now I'm going to tell you about our panelists. And you're going to be hearing first from Rick Shugart, who is a marriage and family therapist. And then you'll be hearing from Pam, Bill, and Kate Roberts. And they're going to share their individual stories and how they as a family have found recovery. But I want to make a couple of notes. Bill Roberts is, just in full disclosure here, he is a member of our board of directors. And I'm very excited to tell you that as of this September, Pam Roberts will be our coordinator of our parent partnership meetings. So Pam has been personally, I can tell you, she's been a mentor to me and to so many other parents who love someone with a substance use disorder. We're so excited she'll be joining our team. And Rick, back when my son was only in his first year of recovery, his dad and I went to see Rick a number of times. So this is truly a family program in more ways than one this evening. So I'm grateful as I can be to have these folks with us. I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and let Rick unmute and take us away. Thank you, Rick.
Welcome, everybody. First, I just want to congratulate Kim on 10 years. It is fabulous. I remember when you first started your first program, looking for partners, and it is pretty much amazing. It's a model hopefully they follow in other cities. So congratulations on 10 years. And I'm always happy to be a part of it. Real brief introduction. I'm not going to go on. I'm assuming some people in the audience know me already. My name is Rick Shugart, marriage and family therapy. Been doing work with addictions, families in crisis, parent lectures and support for about 26 years now. I'm also in recovery 32 years. And I am going to get started because I have a half hour and I want to cover 5 different areas, real brief. And then we'll turn it over to Pam, Bill, and Kate. So the first thing I want to talk about is when we talk about recovery for the substance abuser, we know more about their continuum. Clearly, we want to have some kind of intervention, getting them treatment, whether it's a family talking, a formal intervention, a therapist helping them find treatment, inpatient, outpatient. And then they get sober, and it's recommended they do AA for a long time, pretty steadily. And they meet people, they develop a community. If they do step work and therapy, you start to see character change after they're sober a long time. They have a whole new family of friends and support who both support them and hold them accountable in ways that their families can. And, second year, they work on relationships and they progress, but they're making up for lost time, maturing in all sorts of ways, academically, spiritually, psychologically, occupationally. So you see people blossom and change. And then you see other people who struggle because they didn't know they had a second diagnosis, which is very common with addiction, to have some mood disorder, among other things. So we know, at an assessment, what kind of projection is out there for a recovering patient. For the families, it's different. It's a separate recovery. You're on your own path, meaning, when the substance abuser goes to treatment, they look at their lives and they look at all the things. In AA, they would call them character defects. In psychology, we look at maladaptive coping skills. So for families who have done a dance or evolved around people with substance abuse, their path is to look at what things am I doing that are helping, hurting, and or enabling someone in addiction or recovery. And, so you're on 2 paths looking at 2 totally different things. The goal of both programs, whether you're an Al-Anon or 12-step recovery is eventually to be happy, joyous, and free, and not have this compulsion to be focused on the addiction. Substances for the addict, and the compulsion to focus on the addict for the Al-Anon or family members. So when people say, like, what do you mean defects of character? What do I have? I'm just a mom, or I'm just, a sister or a father. And I'm like, I don't look at behaviors as being right or wrong. They're either effective or not. Like, I can tell you, when we look at things like codependency, it's a term we throw around a lot. There's nothing wrong, and it's kind of wonderful to be generous in this world. But if you give, that's great. If you overgive without reciprocation, that's a problem. It causes resentment. I can function for you at times when you can't, but if I overfunction, I'm just creating dependence. And I can care give when you need it, except when you could be doing it yourself, And if you're doing that with someone with substance abuse, it just gets in the way of them growing, changing, sometimes hitting bottom. So we have to look at all those things in a family of what's working. And there's not one course of treatment for a family that's effective. For substance abusers, go to treatment. Here's what we're going to do: get educated, start working the program. For families, what's healthy for one family could be destructive for another. So the goal for families is to recognize you have a separate recovery to look at. I don't like to say blame or look at your part in the addiction, is look at your coping skills, and are they hurting? Are they helping? Or are they enabling? Usually it's a mix of all three, Over the years, I've noticed that a lot of parents and kids in recovery, parents get to a point where they just ask questions all the time. So is that a defect of character? No, it's inquisitive. Is it effective? No, not at all. You never get answers you like. You get one-word answers. You feel frustrated. You ask more questions, and your kid doesn't want to talk to you. That's kind of true whether they have addiction or not. So it's learning how to ask healthy questions and open-ended questions, and not, did you go to your meeting? Did you go to recovery? Did you talk to your therapist? Like checklist kind of questions. Another big part of the 12 steps, if you haven't been introduced to them or trying to understand them, I've always tried to blend 12 steps in the psychology and find a language we can all do. And one of the big things overall, acceptance is a big concept in 12-step recovery. I always look at, I did my part in its entirety. I can't control the outcome. That's true if you're throwing a dinner party. That's true if you do an interview for a new job. I can only do my part. I can't control the outcome. And that is true when we have family members with addiction or in early recovery. I can only do my part. I can't control the outcome. And that is a huge one for all families to kind of let go and let people on their path. Sometimes that path is painful to watch. And other times we have to intervene if we see they're headed towards not just a bottom, but dangerous behavior that could be lethal. So I just want to make clear, with recovery, there's two separate recoveries going on, two paths. And I want parents to be moving towards health regardless of where their kids are. We still have to have a life. The second thing is for families in recovery, the two big things, and for the substance abuser, is isolation and shame. When we do it by ourselves, we operate out of our head without information. And it can cause anxiety. It can cause self-doubt. It can cause depression. It can cause not wanting to be around other people. Certainly not want to be around people who appear to be happy or healthy, or who kids are doing fine. And then you're stuck in this bubble and nowhere to talk about it to get relief, understanding, information, to know what you're doing is normal or to know what you're doing is unhealthy. And it causes a lot of shame and isolation. You don't want to tell people what's going on for fear of judgment, perceptions, all that kind of stuff. So I've seen people be hesitant for a long time to get any kind of support. I have rarely seen somebody who then gets support and doesn't blossom in some way and feel that you're normal, what you're going through is your reality and other people have experienced it. So that's the isolation and shame piece. The other piece is looking at family support. Like, you have to accept some things. The first thing is you have to accept that we can't do this alone. Rarely have I seen substance abusers or families just do it on their own. I'm sure there are rare cases. They're not the ones that come to my office, obviously. But we have to accept we can't do it alone. And proof in the pudding is when you read any of the 12-step programs, and there's 131 anonymous programs, last I counted, and it says we were powerless over the alcoholic or the drug. Notice it says we, never says I. And it says were, past tense. I'm already operating. I'm not going to do what I did before. So we do have to accept we can't do it alone. And that's number one. When we do accept some kind of family support, that's how we gain information. Gaining information about addiction is confusing, and you can hear 10 different things from all well-meaning people, including myself. Some people have different philosophies, some people have different values. Knowing what's the difference if my kid's abusing, or if they're in an addiction, or if they're in a full-blown addiction with a bottom that's coming that could be lethal. Major differences. There's everything from open dialogue, getting information on how to talk to your kids, how to have open office interventions and talk about what we're doing and what we're going to support, to the interventions, the kind you've seen on TV shows where it's structured. And so part of family support is getting all that information to find out which path is the right one for you and your loved ones. So for family support, the biggest one is you gain information to know where you are on that continuum and what your needs are. And then we have things like Family Support System, Kim's program, a great network of parent support programs that have evolved. Incidentally, that Pam and Bill were instrumental in starting. And they're all over the city. There's Al-Anon, there's therapy, there's some really good information online. Again, this support is essential to create a path of recovery that's right for you and right for your kids. The fourth part, the path for families, usually the most important things I see are an intervention. An intervention does not mean the surprise attack where we're going to all read letters and ask you to take our help. That's appropriate in a lot of circumstances. I coach families and do therapy to have a at-home table discussion first. And if it goes south and it's unproductive, then to have one in my office and say, I don't know how to handle this situation. Let's go and talk to this guy and make some sense of it. So an intervention can be everything from just talking to your kids and knowing how to talk to them, to doing open office intervention, to then creating some boundaries, to figuring out what's enabling, what's support, what's helpful and what's not. So for families on that side, that path, I think one of the hardest things is getting parents to be on the same page at the same time, because we come at it with different information and different value systems. I have some parents who are their value system is I want them working in school, and that's where I want them to be. That's the energy I want to focus on. And I come from the philosophy of if we're not treating addiction, we're not treating anything. So and I'll talk about the value difference, but when couples or parents have that's one of the toughest things, is how to learn to get on the same page at the same time for this particular problem. The other thing that's new, it's a different language I've been using, I've been doing these lectures for a long time, is helping parents. In fact, my next lecture will be pretty much on this topic, is how to parent out of a value system. We all have a value system. That's not a judgment. It's, especially when you have someone with substance abuse, it's your parenting should have a function, much like a manager at a corporate company. If I want my kids to be self-sufficient, oh, that's my value system, then I have to stop doing things for them. If I want my kid to be, to learn how to do things themselves and not just call mom, oh, let me tell them to use their sponsor and their friends as opposed to just fixing it, make it easy. And there's a million other examples of what's the value system I want for the person in my life, especially the substance abusers, and am I parenting out of that? And that's an evolving thing to help parents figure out, eventually get to the place like, I'm only supporting positive, healthy behavior and nothing else. Now, when you have an active substance abuse in your house, that's kind of easy. You know, I'm not supporting giving you the car if you're using. I'm not supporting giving you money if you're buying drugs or alcohol. I'm not supporting college if you're failing out and, you know, you can't maintain sobriety. But in other situations, it's figuring out what is the goal. Because I feel it gets in the way if I don't make boundaries or healthy rules or make it clear that I'm only supporting healthy behavior. And that's whether in addiction or in early recovery. I find it just gets in the way of them maturing, becoming self-reliant, being okay with the word no, which we're all going to hear a lot in life, and how to be self-sufficient, especially with money. You know, it's a struggle for all young kids, addiction or not, to develop a relationship with money. Even harder for the ones with the impulsivity. So I look at that path for families is, you know, you definitely have to get to a place where we can talk about intervention. So we know how to talk about it. Definitely being on the same page. Because if I have two parents who are on opposite ends, it's easy for the substance abusers to manipulate the system, so to speak. And how to parent and get to a place where I'm only supporting healthy, positive behavior, and then defining what that is. You know, what gets in the way in the last piece is what is enabling versus support. You know, enabling, at some trainings you go to will be like, if it's, you know, it's tough love or nothing else, and everything else is enabling. And that's kind of a cookie cutter kind of definition. You know, so enabling for each family is very different. Obviously, if I'm giving you money and to buy drugs and alcohol, it's a clear-cut case of enabling. But there's subtle ones. I'm helping you out with your rent and your utilities, but you're spending your whole paycheck on drugs and alcohol. You know, so there's nuances there. I think I'm being supportive, but I'm really just making it easy for them to have more disposable income for indulgence. Parents get what I call addicted to hope. They get a little bit of good news. And I've done a whole lecture on addicted to hope, whether it's an early recovery or whether somebody has managed to pull together and stop for a couple of weeks. They're like, fine, you can go back to school. Yeah, you can have the car again. And they restart the whole process because they got hopeful because you want it so badly. So it's always being aware. If you have people to talk to, whether friends and parent support groups or an Al-Anon, you can get some feedback loop to know that. I always say if you find 3 or more people who think what you're doing is kind of crazy, it's probably a little crazy or unhealthy. But when you're working in a vacuum, if you're working out of that in isolation and shame and just making decisions, it's easy to get hopeful when my kid is using a couple of weeks and I'm ready to support them in all sorts of stuff. And the cycle repeats. It's, you know, how to support versus enabling. Support is hard because sometimes it's something your kid doesn't want to hear. They'll tell you things like, you're not sending me back to school, you're ruining my life. You know, I'll never be on track with my friends and I don't want to go. This makes me want to use. I can't tell you how many things are wrong with that statement. But I see parents, it's so easy if you're working out of isolation to fall for that trap without making an informed decision. For example, to say, I want to know that you could stay sober for 6 months and manage a class and manage recovery and have some healthy friends and save some money. And then I know you're well-rounded, mature enough to invest in college, as opposed to my kid is like devastated. He wants to use and I'm at fault, so I'll just give in. And I've seen parents, unfortunately, waste a lot of money sending people to school when they weren't ready, you know. So again, we go back to if you're operating on your own in isolation or shame, it's easy to make these decisions. They seem normal until you have real information and experience from other parents, whether, like I said, Al-Anon, good family counseling, friends in parent support groups, and hear examples that parents who have done this stuff and it didn't work. Every parent who has a success story, and Cam and Pam and Bill will tell you, they also made 1,000 mistakes before they got to the success story. I mean, that's just human nature. Much like your kids and your loved ones who are in substance abuse and absolutely in early recovery, they're going to learn more from their mistakes than parenting advice. You know, that's just part of life that cannot be controlled. So, you know, enabling comes from, and enabling varies. It's a big thing if I'm enabling, like my kids smoke a pot and, you know, I'm still giving them spending money. And is that a level of enabling? And for some people that would be, and other people, they have to manage and see other responsibilities. And it's a big difference if your kid's addicted to opiates, where your next use could be your last. Huge difference. So that's why I say there's no one treatment for families that would be good for all families across the board. For some families, you actually have to find room to give your kid the room to succeed or fail, even though you might suspect they're not going to make it, they'll fail. And then I can have healthy boundaries or offer treatment, or I'll stop paying for things, or perhaps tough love if appropriate. You can't live here anymore if this behavior is going to continue. So you have to do a softer approach of succeed or fail. Other families come to you and their kids already doing hardcore opiates, and we got to intervene right away. We're bypassing from A to Z. We're right there. What I find with families is they want recovery really so bad, and who wouldn't, is they don't have a clear understanding of what's helpful and what's not. And that's a huge piece, whether in early recovery. Because when people are in early recovery, one of the hardest things, they've got some treatment, they might be at a halfway house or sober living, or they're paying their own bills. The hardest thing is saying no then when they're in recovery, because is it enabling? Should I make them like they need transportation? Should I buy them a car? Should I make them save something to have some, buy-in? And like, there's no right or wrong answer. But I see parents get riddled with anxiety. I get calls all the time from past patients, families I've treated. Be 2-3 years, they're like, my kid wants a car. Should I buy him one? And I'm like, really? Let's look at the circumstances. Does your kid save any money? There's a whole bunch of variables in there, because you get so caught up and wonder if it's the right decision or not. And you get anxious, and sometimes you tiptoe around your kid, especially if, don't forget, their coping skills that have evolved in the family is they know how to manipulate or lie or make their crisis your crisis. That doesn't go away with the removal of alcohol. That takes a couple of years in recovery, because those coping skills don't work with their sponsor or their buddies or their good friends or their therapist. It only works with parents. So the stronger you get, getting away from these natural instincts to buy into someone and to react rather than respond, the more support you get, the more likely you're going to have a choice in how you respond. And I will tell you, it's hard to say no. It's hard to say no. Sometimes just to avoid the conflict. Sometimes I always say your kids, one of the greatest power base they have is wearing you out. They can talk about something for 5 hours. 5 hours and not have a sore throat. And sometimes you'll give in just because I can't take another minute of it. But your kid has learned that a long time ago. So it's each family has to learn what coping skill I do, how I lose my power, in what way. And it's different from the next family you hear. But the more stories I hear in Al-Anon or family support or lectures, every story you can say one piece of it is like, I did that. I relate to that. And that's the same thing that goes on for alcoholics or substance abusers in 12 steps. They hear things in meetings and they say, I've never told anybody that. And they just shared a piece of my story. Same thing happens with parents because we have very similar experiences, even though it varies with severity or at what stage we're intervening, and it just keeps getting more complicated. I know I glanced at a couple of questions. We have things like, now your kid's 18 and, or 21, and we have medical marijuana and it's legal and they can buy it. And it's, does that make them any less of a, someone who's using it for real medical purposes or a substance abuser, just abuse occasionally, or a full-blown addict? It has to be determined. That's another strange nuance that is out there. When we intervene on kids who are young, because I see them falling through the cracks, there's a big differentiation at, if I do it 14, 15, and I get them on recovery and I get them back on the path, and then they want to experiment 3 years later, and parents are nuts. It's like, that child does need to find out if they were an abuser or if they're an addict. I always say they have to figure that on their own dime as an experiment. But there's all nuances in recovery. So every path is different. But I'll go back to the first piece. If I'm doing it in isolation and shame, I can make a lot of unhealthy choices for my kid and for myself. And the more support you have, that's all I'm emphasizing tonight. And the other piece is, so I wanted to cover, the first part was to understand their separate recoveries and to figure out what your part and your path of recovery is different than your kids. We know we want them intervened on in some way. So separate recoveries, I got to figure out my piece. Am I enabler? Am I just codependent? Am I conflict avoidant? Am I losing my power when my kid uses these coping skills of wearing you down or begging or lying and manipulating? All those things. Two, I want to look at how isolated and shameful I feel about this. And is that blocking me from getting any help? Three would be the family support that I absolutely need to gain information. I can't make decisions without information that comes with support, Al-Anon therapy, parent support groups, and to know that I can't do it alone. Four, the path for families is to understand what intervention is appropriate at what stage in your loved one's life and your life. And absolutely how to learn to get on the same page. If we don't get on the same page, we can make a lot of choices that are not healthy for the parents and for the kid. And to parent, when I start to think of all parenting choices out of a value system, not just for their recovery, for what I want and I want to give, it's easier to find I'm only supporting healthy behavior because this is what I believe in. Then it's easier. Then saying no is a no-brainer. And the example I use, if you're at a dinner party and somebody was intoxicated, no matter how much they begged, you wouldn't give them the keys. And yet with your kids, somehow I'm listening to this dialogue. So there's like an example of, that's a whole nother lecture. Sometimes listening too much is the problem. And then four, once you get in some kind of recovery or support system, you can figure out your version of what's supportive, healthy behavior, what was enabling and not healthy, and make sure I'm not getting addicted to hope the minute I see instantaneous change, then think everything's back on track. So I want to break it up in 5 categories as an overview before I turn it over to Pam and Bill and Kate. Is there anything I didn't cover, Kim?
You know, Rick, thank you so much that you're just yeah, you hit a lot of really great important stuff. If when Pam and Bill are sharing and Kate are sharing, perhaps you might want to take a look at the chat. I think it's really wonderful that people have pointed out they're not just parents on this call. There's some spouses, there's some adult children of alcoholics,
Got
and
it.
so yeah, I think that's I know that a lot of your clientele are parents, and certainly a lot of the folks that Pam and Bill and I
Sure.
interact with are as well. I'm the child of an alcoholic, and Rick mentioned there are more than 130 12-step programs. Back in my 20s, I was going to adult children of alcoholics meetings. Those are so tremendous, and they've expanded to include that adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. So I always say, whose family is functional? We should all be going to 12-step programs. But so maybe if you want to comment on that, or do you want to kind of give it some thought and have those guys go first? How would you want to?
Let's go first, and we can answer that
Okay.
with.
Perfect. Thank you. So Pam, Bill, and Kate, I think Pam, you're going first. Oh, you're muted.
Hey, hi everybody. My name is Pam. Let's see. So I have three children. Kate is my youngest, and I have two boys or sons. One's 5 years older than Kate, and the other one is 3.5 years older. Our journey started with our oldest son, and then it kind of went down the line, with our family. So all of our kids, Bill and myself, have had to deal with, in one way or another, understanding, our issues, getting into recovery. So just so that you're aware of that, as a family member, I have children that are struggling with this disease. I had parents that struggled with this disease, and I had a husband. So, I hit the trifecta on this one. But what I like to do is kind of get everybody to understand kind of where that place is. And for me, it's, as I said, it started with my oldest son, who was 13 at the time. And I can remember, people talking to me about, this is a problem, you need to get tough with him. A lot of different people had a lot of different recommendations. Either they thought I was being too hard, they thought I was being too soft, and I was really struggling. And some of the advice, and I even tried it in Al-Anon, they were telling me, you need to let go. You need to, be able to have that tough love. And I can remember thinking, that's like telling me to stop breathing, because, coming from where I was is I was terrified that he was going to die. And I got to tell you, this played out with every single one of my children. So you don't get to go through it once. And that was my biggest fear. So that was my motivation. That was my driving force of what made me kind of start to change the way I responded. My coping skills changed. Everything was about this belief that somehow I was going to be able to keep my child alive. And I would argue that a lot of parents face that too, because it's terrifying. It's a terrifying disease. And when you layer depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, which all happened in my family, it just adds to it. I remember describing this to someone. It felt like when you get caught in a riptide, and all of a sudden you're swimming away, you're having a great time, and it pulls you out there, and they're telling you on the shoreline, swim sideways, and you're like, are you kidding? I need to come in. This is terrifying. And that's what it felt like when people were saying, you got to stop. You need to change the way you think. You need to change. You need to change the way you love them. You've got to be able to let go. It made no sense to me. So what happened for me, when I really hit my bottom was, I'm in the back of my closet up in my bedroom, and I'm rocking and saying, how did I get here? I'm sobbing. How did I get here? What did I do wrong? How could I have done things differently? And meanwhile, I had a husband down in the basement who was drinking and totally isolating and disconnected. I had my daughter in the garage getting high. I had a son who was in jail, for being drunk and disorderly and punching a police officer. And I had another son who said, I love you to death, but you're all crazy. And he just left. He disappeared. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, that's my moment where I think, you know, I'm not going to survive this if I don't change. I needed to change. I have to figure out, you know, what is it about me and the way I'm thinking and the way I'm responding, right, you know, to this situation that has got me to being in the back of the closet rocking, you know, and crying. And that's, you know, that was my kind of moment, aha moment. And I knew that I had to find this out for me, because what I was going through was very different than some of the other people I knew, you know, were struggling with similar things. And so really getting that professional help for me is what made a huge difference. And I think it really helped me set up those boundaries, understand how to love my kids differently, that set us on the right path. I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
Oh, that was quick. Hey, guys. Yeah, you know, and every time I hear that story from her, it sort of breaks my heart. And I think that it's important to let people know that 5 years before that time, we were that Walt Disney family. I mean, we were, our kids were doing well at school. They were involved with sports and school government, and Pam and I were running a company and doing really well. And then something happened when I turned 40. And we got into really dire straits financially with our company. And our oldest started to act out. I disconnected. Pam convinced me to go see a doctor, and he prescribed Xanax for anxiety and Ambien for sleep. And so I slowly but surely became addicted to those two things. I'd always been a weekend warrior. I always knew that when I started drinking, I couldn't stop. So I didn't drink all the time. But when those things came into my life, things spiraled down fast. And as it spiraled down for me over the next 10 years, it did the same for our kids, all three of them, and Pam. And it was finally when Kate actually was in rehab, and she decided that she wasn't going to come home because I was there, and I was drinking and I was using, and she watched her older brother come home several times from rehab and not make it, go back out. I knew that if I didn't change, like Pam was talking about, that I believed that someone was going to die in the family. And so I was fortunate enough to listen to what my daughter said. It took a couple more months, but I got myself to a meeting and I got sober. You know, somebody asked one of the questions, is this a disease? And yeah, it is. It's got a biological basis to it. And it's got a psychological basis. It's also got a social basis of who you hang out with and what you do and what you expose yourself to. But if you are one of those people lucky enough to have the genes that say, yeah, once I start using this, I won't be able to stop, not by myself, then you got to find your way to recovery. And Rick talked about we, and it's so important. I mean, you know, everybody's asking these questions, and I feel it's very important to let you know that on my own, I never could have done this. I never could have done it. I had to surrender. As a matter of fact, I had to kind of remove myself for the first 6 months of my sobriety, even out of the family. I had to immerse myself in recovery, and it's hard. It's hard to get sober. It's impossible to get somebody else sober. And I knew that with my father, who was an alcoholic, and he died of the disease when he was 69. He had been sober for 9 years, but his body was ruined. And and I have 3 kids. And, you know, I think that people say, no, it's just bad behavior. It's a moral failing. And I can assure you that it's not. And the people who are addicted, they don't want to be. They want to be back with their families. They want something, but they are stuck where they are. And while the parents want them back, very often, or other family members, we actually say do the wrong things because we think we know they're sick, but why don't they want to get better? I mean, if you had cancer, you'd want to, you know, get treatment. You had Crohn's disease, you certainly would want to get treatment. But if you've got addiction, the only thing you want is to continue using. And you're going to do whatever it takes to do that. So I strongly suggest to anybody, since I was classified as being able to go to adult child and Al-Anon and parent groups in AA, it's very important to get help. And once you do that and you allow yourself to be a little vulnerable, hopefully not only will you go to a support group or 2, but you'll reach out to a therapist. I can't say enough how important that is. For someone who is really in trouble, you can ask the question, you won't necessarily get the right answer. We all have the same problem, but not necessarily the same solution. And there are things that are a part of us. So if you're looking for a really quick answer, you're not going to find it. I don't know of anybody who just, instantly gets it. I can pick on Kim because she's here. And I remember her coming to her first meetings and being very upset, crying a lot, but also surrendering and taking notes and listening and sharing and getting on the same page with people and trying to figure out taking the long haul. She did the work, and that is what it takes to get sober. Whether you're a parent or a drunk or an addict, you got to put in the time to get sober. I lift my hats to several of the parents who are around the country who have organized parent groups and who run them and who are in service to others, which is a hallmark of sobriety, in my opinion. And they're helping other parents and other family members to deal with those issues, talking with them once a week, getting together and meeting and having parties, doing things together. And so I think that the recovery piece, while we were that Walt Disney family and we turned into this mess, today we are solid. We're back as a family. We've done the work, and it's fantastic. We are back to where we were. It's a loving, caring family, sober family. So that's what I got. I'm going to turn it over to Kate.
Thanks, Mom and Dad. Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Roberts. I'm Pam and Bill's daughter. Kim, thanks so much for doing this. And Rick, you did awesome. Loved it. And of course, Mom and Dad kicking off our family story. I am 15 years in recovery, 15 and a half now. And, these days, obviously not back then, but I'm a therapist. I live in Philadelphia with my partner, my wife, and my little dog, Hoagie. And I have this crazy cool life that if you had told me this 15 years ago, that this is what my life was going to look like, I would have laughed in your face. Because what I have today is, literally beyond anything that I could have imagined. And it's not all rainbows and unicorns. Sometimes it is, but not always. But that's the beauty of what I've gotten to do in the last 15 years and the tools that I've learned through various different people and groups that kind of help me deal when things are in the hole, because that's just life, right? But today I don't have to drink over it. And today I don't scream at my parents. I don't run away from home. I don't pick fights with my brothers mostly. You know, I'm in it with them, and I choose to be a part of this family, you know, and I choose to have these relationships that I have with them. But anyway, getting ahead of myself. So yeah, I have a father who's an alcoholic and two older brothers who's an alcoholic, grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles, all of the above, friends. Pretty much everybody in my life is in some sort of recovery or needs to be in some sort of recovery. And that's, you know, my story. I had to deal with siblings and parents and everything like that. And when I was younger and I was watching my brother, my oldest brother go through it, and then the second oldest brother go through it, I really didn't want to be the kid that did it, you know? But lo and behold, at that point when I started, our family was already pretty torn apart. Nobody really knew what to do. And the answer was send my oldest brother, Matt, out to treatment, or he goes to jail, you know, out to another halfway house, out to another hospital. That was the answer. None of the answer was, let's look at us and what we can do as a family. Let's come together. Let's figure out how we can support one another. It was send them away. Because that's all we knew, you know. There were no tools. There was nothing that my parents could do. So I saw that happening, and I didn't want that to happen to me. But because our family was already so torn apart, you know, I was in the garage and my mom's upstairs, my dad's in the basement, and Matt's in jail. Like, because we were so torn apart, I just had no skills. So I turned to drinking and using. And I did that for a while. And then, you know, it came to a time where I needed to go to treatment. And, you know, my mom and I talked about it. And then we went to my dad. I remember going down to the basement where he would be drinking. And, you know, I was the one that said, Dad, I need help. And he said, no. He said, you know, we've done the rehab thing. You know, I don't want you to go. And I also know part of it is like, he didn't want to stop drinking. And that's what this disease does, right? But we were able to kind of convince him. I don't really remember how, but, you know, 2 days later I was in treatment. And I stayed in treatment, and it was really hard. And when I got out, I thought treatment was hard, but that was nothing compared to what it was like when I got out of treatment. I was 18 years old. I was still in high school. I was living with my parents. And I was totally, totally clueless. I had been like ripped out of my community, which is exactly what I needed for 4.5 months. And in a safe place where I could heal and then put back into this community. And what was I supposed to do? I had no sober friends. So they put me in a different high school, which was really, really important for me. If I had gone back to my big high school, that would have been not good. So they put me in an alternative high school. So I was around other sober kids, you know, but being at home, when I first got there, like, we're kind of a family of extremists. And so when I came home, I had a list. My father likes to print things out too, right? So I had a list that my therapist went over with me of, this is what you can't do. And like 2 things, and this is what I can do, right? And they were weird things. Like I wasn't allowed to have my door shut. You know, I could only smoke on this one area of the sidewalk. Like I couldn't smoke on the property, you know, just like things like that. And yeah, meanwhile, my dad had been a smoker for like 30 years. So anyway, but so there was all these, what I think he was trying to do was set boundaries, but really they were these really intense and high expectations that they were going to monitor my every move. And now I totally understand where that's coming from. But at this point, still, we were a torn apart family, you know. There was still, nobody was really working on themselves. You know, I went off to treatment, but mom and dad were still kind of torn apart, right? So there were these expectations, and I started pushing back, and they were not helpful, because there was no conversation about them. It was, these are my expectations of you, and you're going to follow them. And if you don't, here are the consequences. And that wasn't helpful for me, right? But I started going to meetings. My dad started going to meetings, which I was like totally blown away about. But they also started going to this parents group. And it was cool because there was a parents group meeting at the same time there was an AA meeting. So they would go to that one on the one side of, I think it was a church, and I'd go on the other side. And I felt like things started to turn. And the first time that I noticed it is that they started having conversations with me about like, hey, these are our expectations. What do you think? Like, what do you think is a good punishment? I remember my mom asking me that question. I was like, what? Like they're involving me in these conversations. And now I'm feeling kind of a part of the decisions of the family. And I kind of get to decide here, how this is going to go. I don't feel like such a small child anymore. I feel like I'm being invited in. And that's what they did. I had my very best friend died about 2 months out of treatment. And for me, that was enough to take me out and go relapse. And so I did. And I went out and things, my oldest brother at that time, he had also, at that point, he had gotten sober, but then he wasn't sober then. So we all started to pull apart again. And I know I barely remember that time because I remember it was, sorry, there was big lightning, big thunder. I don't remember a whole lot of that time other than it being really, really dark. And I knew that it was really dark for everybody. And I didn't like pick up where I left off. I picked up and was 10 levels beyond what I had been when I first stopped drinking and using. So within a 2-month time frame, things were really, really bad for me. And the epiphany moment, the moment that finally made me go, okay, like I need to do something. Something needs to change, was I had gone out on a bender. I'd come back. My mom was sitting at the kitchen table and she said to me, okay, look, like you have 2 options right now. And this was January, so it was very cold out. And she said, I'll either give you a ride to your dealer's house right now. And you can go be there and you're not welcome back, or I will give you a ride to a meeting and you can stay here with us, but yeah, I got to go to meetings. I was an 18-year-old girl. Then the options was homelessness in the winter or go to a meeting and have a warm home. And the disease of addiction made me sit there and think about that. And like, that's what addiction does, where it's like, you're either going to be homeless or not. And the only requirement to not being homeless is you just go to these meetings. And I still had to sit there and think about it, because like what my dad was saying, and Rick, is like addiction just wants more and more and more, I knew a big part of me didn't want that to happen, but I also was so severely in my disease that I had a moment of pause. Ultimately, I finally decided, okay, take me to the meeting, drive me to the meeting, and I'll stay here with you. And that's a really key, important part of my story and our story, because at that point, my parents, even though I was still out drinking and using, and so were my brothers, they were still working on themselves. They were still working with the therapist. They were going to their parents' meetings. They were doing Al-Anon. They were still doing what they needed to do for them. And so from my perspective, because they were doing that and putting in the work, they were able to be like, okay, we're not going to give you everything you want anymore. And they kind of did have to do, I don't really like to call it tough love, but it was just kind of like, here are your options and you can choose. And had she not done that, I don't know where I'd be today. Because the thing is, and I think my siblings and I all have this, is that no matter how angry or upset or how far we're gone in mental health or addiction, like we're always willing to meet our parents halfway, you know, or at least a little bit of the way. And we always know that there's an option that if you do want to feel better or be okay, like my hand's here, and if I can't help you, I'm going to put your hand in the hand of someone that will. And that was the message that was drilled in my head, and it's still drilled in my head, you know, and I know that my brothers would say the same thing. And so that's what they did. You know, they couldn't help me. My dad tried to make me go to only his meetings, and I said, no, y'all are old. So, you know, I went to I found my young people, and I did that. And they did, you know, they took my hand and they put it in the hand of somebody else that could help me. And they took a step back. You know, there was no long sheet of demands. It was more or less, you know, these are our expectations. You know, you do have a curfew. I was still in high school, so you have a curfew. We do expect you to go to meetings and have a sponsor and work your steps and hang out with healthy people. I knew those were the expectations. I knew those were the boundaries. They didn't bug me all the time about, did you go to your meeting? They didn't bug me all the time about steps, but they had a general idea of where I was because I told them, you know. But the cool thing was, again, it's like what was really important is they kept inviting me in for the connection. They kept inviting me in to have these conversations rather than have this like one up, one down experience. And it was more so when I was a little bit healthier, but I just always felt like they were, not always, but we came to a place where they were a safe place for me to go and chat if I needed to. And I knew that they weren't going to freak out at me. And that's been the case, you know? So here we are 15 years later, you know, they're two of my best friends. I lived out in California for 12 years and had a great time, and it was amazing, but they're the reason I wanted to come back. I was tired of being 3,000 miles away from my parents, you know? And so now I'm here with them, and, you know, because I'm sober and because of the support that I had, I got to go to college and graduate college. I got to go get my master's degree, and I'm now a therapist. You know, I have amazing relationships with all of my family members. I want to touch real quick on my brothers. Through all this, they have both done this kind of in and out thing of recovery. And being a sibling, I can only speak from the siblings' perspective. It's not easy. It's not easy to watch them kind of, you know, tread that line. But what I do know is that I do have two solid parents that I can call and be like, what do I do? Because my Al-Anon stuff, you know, my codependency stuff starts to come out. And I get those feelings like I need to do something, you know, or why can't they just stop? And that happens to me. But I have people, and I don't say that stuff to them, you know, because I know that doesn't help. I've been on the other end. So I go to my people and I say, what do I do? What do I do in this situation? How do I protect myself? You know, how do I protect this relationship? And it's always my choice what kind of relationship I want to have. And so I do. I choose the kind of relationship I want to have. I am not super in their lives, you know, but I'm also like, it's good. You know, I have a clear boundary of what we talk about and what we do. And for me, that's good. So I just want to touch on that because I know there's some other people in here that might necessarily aren't parents or have siblings or stuff. But for me, it's definitely recognizing what my internal boundaries are. And I can't figure that out on my own. I needed help from other people to figure that out. And then implementing those boundaries and sticking with it and being okay with that and knowing that like this recovery ebbs and flows, you know? And that's just kind of the nature of it. So I feel like I talked a lot. I want to, you know, wrap up my time. I'm sorry I talked a lot, but, you know, thanks for letting me share my piece here.
Thank you so much, Kate. I love what you just said about that you can't find those internal boundaries on your own. That is so true. I think we don't even hear ourselves, like when we say it out loud in a meeting, sometimes that's even when we can get that aha moment, like, wow, what am I doing? So thank you. That was really terrific. We have so many great questions coming in. So there were several that were asked in advance that are very similar to this one that was just asked in the chat a moment ago. How do you deal with a family member? Oh, you know what? I'm going to pause for 1 second and ask Rick. I'm going to circle back to you, Rick, because you were going to kind of give us some thought. We had some questions saying, my father is an addict too. I have to live with him right now. He's addicted to marijuana and gets high several times a day. Doesn't think there's anything wrong with it. I don't know how to handle it sometimes because his behaviors are hurtful. But then also questions like wives, children, siblings, all involved with parents in adult, along with parents in adult substance use. Mom's an addict, adult child, spouse. So I'll let you jump in on that, Rick.
Well, we have parents who are in their addiction. It's finding, hopefully we can find some way to get some sense of connection with them. Whether that's I go to breakfast with them before they start using, whether that's we like our baseball games or we can connect over an activity. And it goes back to the Al-Anon concept of like, I can't change them. I can't wish them recovery. How do I detach with love, which is an Al-Anon concept? How do I get support elsewhere? So I'm not here looking for support from this person who's altered and it can be hurtful. Like the questionnaire said, the question said, is not to stay in the hurt too long. Find other places where I'm not hurt and limit the amount of conversations. We still want something from our parents, and that's a good avenue to look at. What am I still wanting that they're not capable of giving, and why am I still seeking it? Once we take our parents off a pedestal and stop wanting it, we can really begin to be healthy. And if I have aging parents who are using, sometimes I become more the parent and they turns into more childlike, and I have to adjust myself to that. And so in a nutshell, it's not one flat out answer what to do, but it's getting support where other people know, like, how do they cope with parents who are stuck in their addiction or just using? I don't like being in the company of my parent when they're using, but right now I have to live with you. How do I get my own support? Or I could do superficial conversation, but I'm not going to go for deep conversations where I get hurt.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it's each role is so unique, isn't it, Rick? I mean, having grown up with an alcoholic, I had resentment. I had, you're supposed to be my dad, get it together, that kind of thing. And then when I finally recognized that my son had a substance use disorder, it was like, oh my God, I screwed up. What did I do wrong? How did we miss that? It just, the tables completely turned and I just came at it in such a different way. And if it's a friend, we look at it so differently. There's maybe more compassion, I don't know. It's just, it's siblings, as Kate was saying. I think I hear a lot from siblings about resentments because the attention was taken away from the, relatively healthy child when all the focus has been on the child.
I would say siblings are the least focused on in recovery. And because siblings aren't parents, often they do a cutoff, like, yeah, my brother's got nothing to offer, I'm out of here. And they'll see them at holidays, but they lost the closeness and often people in recovery don't go back and do too much amends to their siblings. I've seen it take 10 years before they go to their siblings and be like, I know I really affected your adolescence. There was no room for you in that family because I took up all the space, but they don't see that. It takes a long time. So siblings often neglect it. Thankfully, if they come to therapy, they can get some of their work done and feel heard and supported in therapy before they go back and try and mend some of those relationships if possible.
Right. Thank you for that. And I just want to say, if there are siblings with us this evening, reach out and contact me because I think that, Pam and I have talked about this. Once she is in place as our coordinator of the parent support groups and other groups, we would love to give, to kind of facilitate a group or help some siblings get a group started on Zoom, because that way we don't have geography to worry about. There's always an opportunity to meet. So I know there've been some attempts in the past to start up some sibling groups. And if you know of any, let us know. Or if you'd like to help us get something started, let us know. I'll share my contact info in the chat in just a moment. So I started to ask a question about, how to deal with a family member when they've been drinking for days. And we also had several other questions, a family member who doesn't want help, having an honest discussion with someone about their addiction, if they're functioning in an alternate reality, so lots of questions about that. We see it, they don't see it. What do we do?
I think Rick talked about this dance. I think you even referenced the dance, right? And the dance for me, anyhow, had to do with that learned behavior, right? Which starts, at least with your children, from the time they're little, but it can be with your parents, your brothers, anybody, where you kind of dance this dance, right? And somebody needs to stop dancing the dance, right? And I feel like in this case, what I always have to ask myself is, what do I have control over, right? Me. That's it, right? That's it. And that was something that, took me a while to get there, because I really felt like, it was my job to try and control, these folks. Otherwise they were going to die, right? And then when I when I was in the back of that closet, that's what I finally had to come to is, it doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter how much I love them, right? I am not going to be able to control the outcome. I am not going to be able to control what they do. What I can control is me and how I respond. So that is a huge thing to get to, and really believe that. And however you get that, sometimes for us and other people, it's hearing that over and over again in meetings, and then just kind of experiencing, no matter what I do, no matter what I say, it's not changing. So I can change me. When that dance starts to change is when you may get that attention, because unless you do something different, right, nothing's going to change. And then having the help to figure out, what are those boundaries? What does that mean? And for me, learning how to love these people differently was this understanding that this is for now. This is for today, right? That the things that I may be doing now isn't forever, it's just for now. And that was important for me, because I needed to know that I could do this. I just needed to be able to do it for today. And even today, Katie, if I'm stressing about something, she'll remind me, where are your feet? Where are your feet, Mom? I'm right here, because I will future trip like you would not believe, right? And that was an important piece for me. So if somebody is not willing, not doing it, and we're continuing to do the same dance, we got to stop. We got to pause. We got to take a breath, whatever that is, and start looking at, okay, I need to get some help. I need to get some help to figure out, how do I do this, right? How do I get to a place where I can be safe in my own home and set up my boundaries?
I think what we've also seen over the years is that when the bomb of addiction goes off in a house, siblings are healthy. Parents run in, but the siblings run out. They have their own lives to take care of, and they're typically a lot healthier. But clearly, if there's love in that family, there's trauma, and everybody gets affected. This is a family disease, in that you can't watch somebody go through that and not be impacted. So I think parents are traumatized in many cases by watching their child. And it's not a single event, it's many events over a long period of time, where they wreck a car, they get brought home by the cops, they flunk out of school, they steal heirlooms and sell them, and maybe they overdose, and you see them on the kitchen floor. Parents get traumatized by the stuff that goes on, but so does everybody else in the family. So if you have a parent that's going through it, whatever, reach out and get help, because you can't do this by yourself.
Great, thanks, guys. Okay, any tips for getting on the same page as your spouse?
We were not on the same page. I just want to say that.
Don't ask us.
Well, we started out totally. So you know what? Everybody responds to this differently. I think Rick alluded to this as well. It is so different in every family. My response, it is fear-based. I mean, I would say for the most part, it is fear-based, really for everybody, because it's somebody you love and you're just worried about that person not being in your life anymore, right? My fear response was total despair. I got to a place where I could hardly function. I couldn't focus. I was almost numb in the sense that I couldn't figure out my feelings. I was only absorbing everybody else's feelings, right? So I didn't even recognize my own, and felt a whole lot of guilt, a whole lot of shame. Bill's response was, he was pissed off. He was angry. And then he's like, got the fuckets, right? Excuse my friend. He got the, whatever. And so it was very different. And then this is the funny part, as we started to, I started to kind of work on myself. He was doing the same thing. Everybody started getting sober and in a prayer. We were the poster child family for people in recovery. Only I was not, okay? I was, working with a therapist, but I wasn't doing a program. I wasn't working everything. And here I thought, I had spent all this time having to deal with all of these addicts, and then they all get in the program. They're all having fun, meeting people, ha, 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 laughing, and I am still miserable, okay? And I was like, what is up with this? And that's when I realized, hey, I need to also be doing the same thing. And so I started going to Al-Anon, and I started to understand, I needed to make some changes. And when we started to speak the same language, then we got on the same page. But we were given some great counsel or great advice from a couple of therapists, Rick being one of them, is even if you're not on the same page, you have to present like you are, right? Because, oh my God, that is a great opportunity for a person who is either in early recovery or not there yet to just, rule the roost here. So you have to come to terms with that, agree ahead of time, get a mediator with a therapist or whatever to say, this is the path we're going to take, and stick to it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The one thing I would say is, and I encourage couples, whether they're in recovery or not, is when we both agree, we both agree. Support is actually, I disagree, but I can live doing it your way. That's what support really is. And if it doesn't work, well, then try something else. But support means I will support you. It doesn't mean I have to agree with you 100%, but I'm willing to support you and then not inadvertently sabotage it. So getting on the same page is not meaning we have to agree exactly. It's like, I'll support your way. I think your consequences are harsh, but I'll go with it this time.
I tried to get her to do that all the time. Wouldn't go there.
Nope. Took me a while. I was stubborn.
I'd like to add something to that too. I think I like to suggest to parents, like, give yourselves a break. You don't have to be the only person to convince your spouse of your view. And perhaps the way that to do that is, as Pam and Bill were saying, like bringing in a therapist to this. And I just described this last night in my support group, was when we were preparing for our son's intervention, and we were writing our cost letters, and his dad showed me his letter. Now, mind you, I'm very emotional right now because we're preparing for an intervention. I read the letter and it said something about you'll always have a roof over your head. And I said, you can't say that. And I overreacted, and he overreacted then. I'm like, well, I'm not going to throw him out. And I said, I think you should call our interventionist. He was on the phone with her for 10 minutes and he was like, I'm rewriting the letter. And he was totally calm. He just needed an objective person, just someone who he wasn't married to for 30 years to say, to kind of give him a little bit of a reality check. And they can hear it so much more when it's coming from that objective person. So please give yourselves a break. Don't feel like you have to be, have all the answers and all of that. So please reach out, even if it's connecting, as we recommended to a parent last night, connecting with another parent in the group. Why don't you see what this other dad or this other mom has to say about that? Just give yourself a break. Pam, someone would like to know from you how you learned to detach.
Yeah. So I felt a lot of shame when people would say, well, you're an enabler or you're codependent, like, because it felt like it was judgmental and to me, right? And maybe because I'm sensitive and, because I knew I was in my heart, but it didn't help me, right? Because, I remember going to Al-Anon meetings and saying that everybody was talking about tools in a toolkit. And I was asking, could you just tell me what those tools are, right? So that I can figure this out, today. But for me, it was that idea of being able to love them differently. and I used to do things with Kate and my sons where I would, with all the love in my heart, help them fill out applications for jobs and, call their bosses and, do things like that. And what I didn't understand was, all that love and best efforts was actually undermining their dignity. And the message that they eventually started to receive is, I can't because you are doing it for me, right? And that was never my intent, but that was the outcome. And so it was my understanding of how what I was doing with all the best intention was actually contributing. Yeah, it did. It took a lot of time, and it took listening to people, whether it was in Al-Anon meetings or in parent groups, talking about the same thing. And it's funny because when you hear it from somebody else and you're listening to them say a story, it's almost like you're like, oh my God, I do the same thing, and you can see it differently. And so I had to come around to that place of what does that look like for me, Mm-hmm.
And I can't detach from my child. I'm sorry, I can't detach, but I can disengage. I can disengage from the chaos. I can disengage from the addictive thinking that they might have, and they're trying to convince me that I'm crazy. If I can recognize that, that's the first step, right? Like, oh my God, I'm getting pulled in again. So I can disengage from the addictive process, that chaos and all that comes with
I
it.
agree. And sometimes saying no is the most loving thing that you can say. That was the part that I had to understand. I love that. Disengage. That's exactly right. Pause. Take a breath.
Yes. Yes. Wait, why am I talking? Okay. Some questions about boundaries. What does a person's life look like after several months in a sober house? When do they start to live independently? I don't want to pile on too much here, but another question about someone with a relapse history who might want to move closer to home, doesn't share much about the process with the family member. Anyone want to talk about those kinds of?
I'll a brief overview real quick.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's done treatment and they were lucky enough to have some extended care or aftercare or sober house or transitional house or halfway house, and they're there, my standard advice is 99% of the time, let them keep going. They will love when they finally get their first apartment and they have a roommate and they buy their first picture and they learn how to live and it's theirs. I rarely see people come back home and grow. That's across the board. Even college kids who don't have addiction, they come home and they don't work and they get very comfortable and then they don't grow. It's like 6 months of staleness. For somebody with substance abuse, they're making all this progress. Keep going. Then I can look and find ways to help support you if you're helping yourself. If you're working a job, I can help you out with, and you're living a clean life, I can help you out with a little bit of utilities or help you with a down payment on a car. Like I can be generous after you're in your life, but bringing them back home, I don't want them to regress, both in their recovery and God forbid addiction. So if they're there, they're already on a good path. They're going to keep growing and they will learn more from their mistakes. And the world will hold them more accountable and provide structure more than any parent ever could. In a nutshell.
Yeah, for parents, it's the same. Unless you have done an incredible amount of work and are really strong and are continuing to do that work, we all very quickly regress back to the same dance, right? Living together. And that's always, again, we've done, it even happens still to this day, right? So it's not that you never get to be with your children anymore. It just has to look different. And different isn't bad. But it is always better if they can be with their tribe and work through that process in that setting. Katie, I know you've done a lot of work. You worked in sober living and rehabs and things like that. What are your thoughts on that? Mm-hmm. And when is enough?
There we go. It wasn't working. I totally agree with Rick. When I lived in California and I worked for a treatment center for like 7 or 8 years, and the ones that would stay, they would do 90 days of inpatient treatment, and then they would move to kind of like an IOP extended care, meanwhile, all living in a sober living house. And they would stay there until they had about a year, which was amazing because they had the resource to do that. And the parents that kind of supported that, now they had certain things that they had to do, they had to be self-sufficient. They had to, for the most part, they had to have a job or be going to school or both. They had to be going to meetings. There's a bunch of rules, but it was building a community for them. And for me, my understanding is, if you have a solid community, you're going to stay sober. So keeping them there was the best. And kind of like what Rick was saying, parents would be like, okay, you're living a clean life, you're getting time sober, like, let me help you, with a deposit on an apartment after they've been sober for a while and they have sober roommates moving in and stuff like that. So we always supported that too.
Thank you.
Kim, I've got a quick, there was one of the questions was asked about the lack of psychiatrists available. And I see that very often. Does anybody have any advice about how to, is there a time when you go to a GP after seeing a therapist to get meds, or you have to go and see a psychiatrist? It's almost impossible to get one today.
It depends. If you're going in network only to use your insurance, you have to go in your book and look. And a lot of those places want you to be seen by a social worker or a therapist in their practice, get evaluated, get your story, and then they'll refer you to the in-house psychiatrist, and they work and collaborate. So in network, they don't want to often, they're not always want to work with an outside therapist and then do an in-network thing. So you have to go in the system. It's like two different worlds. When you're doing just, self-pay or out of pocket or getting your own reimbursement, like a large amount of therapists do, you have more access to different therapists, but you have to put the money up front and then get some reimbursement from your insurance companies. But in network, you just have to go into the system and finding in there. And there are some really good people. The wait list tends to be longer. And, depending on the mood disorder and depending on how long you've been on it, if you've been on, say Zoloft for years and your GP is comfortable, that's a relationship between you and your GP. But when you have complicated dual diagnosis mood disorders, I would not recommend a GP. I would want a psychiatrist to evaluate you, and a therapist too, because the therapist can give the psychiatrist the most amount of feedback.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Rex.
Sure.
So I'm going to say, because we're getting really close to 8:30, I do want to ask this one last question that came in, because it is something that comes up quite a bit. But I want to say that we will have the follow-up page. The video will be on there. And Bill very kindly answered some of the advanced questions. I'm going to post those on that follow-up page as well. And also the contact information for each of us is on that page. So we had so many wonderful questions, but this one I think is really a good one. I have a daughter who 35 years old who went for treatment. When she came home, left to move to another state with her new boyfriend. She's convinced that she's not an alcoholic. She has house arrest coming up and has to live in Montgomery County, but I'm afraid to let her move back in here when that happens. And I know for sure that we have so many parents in our support groups who are often being pressured by the court system to be the place of residence after they're released from prison or from treatment or whatever. And there's this really huge challenge with boundaries when that happens. So any thoughts about this particular question, Rick, or anyone?
Yes, absolutely. I would just go back to what I said earlier is I'm only supporting healthy behavior, and living in my house, there will be no drinking or active use, whether you think you're an alcoholic, an addict or not. I'm not supporting that. If you're doing it on your own dime, it's okay. Now you have this new complication and you have to live in Montgomery County. If you were to do that, you would have to be sober in my house. Sort of like what Kate said. All I have to do is go to the meeting or be homeless. You had a choice there. This would be the same thing for your adult daughter. But if you're not going to be sober here, live here until your court case comes, then go back with your boyfriend and drink. If I feel like doing that. But if I did do it, there's a clear boundary. I'm not supporting it just because you've changed your mind. Doesn't mean I've changed my mind.
Right.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is, parents, again, this is another one of those things where, oh Lord, get some help, work this out, come up with a plan B. Because if you don't have plan B in your head, you're going to be like driving yourself crazy, looking for every little thing, right? So, I would work out what is plan B? What is, okay, I said that. She said, oh, yes, I will. And then she shows up and all hell breaks loose, right? And she drinks or whatever. That's the piece that you have to have ahead of time. If that happens, then I do this, right? And that's the part where getting a mediator or someone else to kind of walk you through that, understanding what me, and knowing that Pam, you got to stick to this, and I know you can, right? Kind of thing. That relationship is important, so that that way, then there's a good shot that it could work as long as you have that plan B.
Practice informed love rather than tough love.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I would be on board with saying also, if it came to the conclusion, not coming back to live with me, because I don't want to go back to being a suspicious person since you say you drink now, or wondering or looking for bottles or questioning where you are. I don't want to live like that. So it's not healthy for me. It has nothing to do with you.
Mm-hmm.
That would be another approach as well.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Absolutely. And that can be very loving. Honest to God, this isn't about you. This is about me. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And I see there's a question about treatment for Medicaid. The best way to go there would be to go to your county's website and find out where their case management offices are, and check in with them for an assessment, and then they'll place this person for the 3 months of treatment that they're looking for. And I don't want to take up time because you guys have been so great. I am going to post Bill's responses. If any of you panelists have responses to some of those other questions you'd like me to add to, I will do that. Again, conversation.zone/Montco is the follow-up page. Thank you to the Department of Health and Human Services. Thank you, Rick and Pam and Bill and Kate and Judy and Kara. You guys were all great. And thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate you being here.
Can I put in one plug?
Take the survey. Go ahead, Bill.
As a member of the board, which I know you won't do it, I want to thank Tim and Judy and Kara. And go to the conversation.zone webpage. And if you feel like it, you can hit the donate button and make a contribution. I'm sure the board would appreciate it.
What a good board member you are, Bill Roberts.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Good
Bye.
night.
Bye.
Hi, thank you.